8 in the evening, and the phone is face down on the kitchen counter. It has been face down since 6. That was a decision. Turning it back over takes about a second. And there is a reason a person stops doing it. There are 2 plates in the sink. One is from tonight. The other has been sitting there since Tuesday. Nothing here is a crisis. The rent got paid. The car starts. Somebody at work said something kind on Thursday and meant it. There are people who feel forgotten in a house full of family, and people who feel forgotten in a house with nobody in it at all. The Bible has a great deal more to say to both of them than most of us have ever been told. Now goes somewhere else. A woman is walking through open desert with the sun most of the way down. She is a slave. She is pregnant. She is running. And there is no particular place she is running to, because there is no house on that map that belongs to her. Behind her is a camp with 2 important people in it, a plan that involved her body, and a conversation about her that she was not part of. Nobody in that camp is coming after her. Nobody will send word ahead. She could walk until the water ran out, and the story would close over the space where she used to be. Nobody in that story is looking for her, and she is about to become the first person in the entire Bible to give God a name. The dust in that country is fine and pale, and it gets on the ankles first. By the second hour it has worked up into the creases behind the knees. She is far enough along that her weight sits differently, and her stride has shortened without her deciding to shorten it. She stops more often than she wants to. She is heading south, toward Shur. That is the road back to Egypt. She came out of Egypt years ago. Now she is walking the same route in reverse, alone this time, going back to a country she was taken out of, with no reason to think anybody there remembers her name. Here is what she left. Abram was promised a son. He believed it. And then 10 years went by in Canaan, and no child came. 10 years is long enough for a promise to stop feeling like a promise and start feeling like a math problem. So Sarai found a solution inside the household. Genesis 16, verse 2. Go into my slave. It may be that I shall obtain children by her. Sarai speaks. Abram listens. A third person gets discussed in the third person, close enough to be sent for. She conceives, and the tent tilts. Genesis says that when Hagar saw she was pregnant, her mistress became small in her eyes. Something in the balance between those 2 women shifted, and both of them felt it. And it went bad, fast. Sarai goes to Abram, and what she says is a charge, not a request. May the wrong done to me be on you. And Abram gives one of the worst answers in the book. Your slave is in your power. Do to her as you please. Whatever he thought he was doing. That is a man walking out of a room and closing the door behind him. He hands a pregnant woman back to the person who is furious at her for being pregnant. And he uses the word power to do it. Genesis says Sarai dealt harshly with her. The same Hebrew root turns up later in Exodus for what the Egyptians did to the Hebrews. The Egyptian woman is on the receiving end of it here, in a tent in Canaan, hundreds of miles from home. So she runs, and she is the first person in the Bible to run into the wilderness, before Moses, before Elijah, before David in the caves. The first one out that door is an Egyptian slave girl with no property, no protector, and a child coming, who goes looking for a runaway slave. Nobody in that camp had to say it out loud. Everybody already knew the answer. The sun goes over. The heat keeps coming up off the ground for a while after the light leaves it. And she finds a spring. Genesis is specific about that. Not a well with a stone across it that somebody has to roll away. A spring in the wilderness. Water coming up out of the ground on its own. In a place where nothing is supposed to come up out of the ground on its own. She sits down beside it. Then a voice, and the first word out of it is her name. Hagar, slave of Sarai. Where have you come from, and where are you going? In the tent she was the slave. Sarai called her my slave. Abram called her your slave. Genesis has given us 4 or 5 exchanges about this woman by now, and not one person in any of them has used her name. Out here, in the last place, anyone would look. The first word spoken to her is Hagar, then a question in 2 halves. Where have you come from is something she can answer. Where are you going is something she cannot, and both of them know it. And the voice asks anyway. She answers the half she can. I am fleeing from my mistress Sarai. What comes back is a future, a song, a name already chosen for him, Ishmael, which means God hears, because the Lord has listened to your affliction, descendants beyond counting, which is the same promise that was made to Abram, delivered out here to a woman sitting in the dirt with nobody around to witness it. And then she does something nobody else in Scripture does. She names him. You are the God who sees me. Every other name for God in the Bible comes from the other direction. God says who he is, and people write it down. This one runs the opposite way. A slave woman, on the road, out of a country that threw her away, hands God a name, and it sticks. The well was still called by it generations later when Genesis was written down. Bir Lahai Roy, the well of the living one who sees me. Somebody kept calling it that. People kept walking past that water and saying the name out loud, long after the woman who came up with it was gone. Genesis does not say she was rescued. She was seen. She was not rescued. Genesis puts those 2 facts in the same paragraph and does not apologize for either one. The next verse is the one people skip. Return to your mistress and submit to her. Go back, back to the tent, back to the woman who dealt harshly with her, back to the man who said, do as you please, and then left the room, back into the arrangement that put her on that road in the first place. That is what she is told. Genesis does not soften it, and Genesis does not explain it. There is no verse where the angel says Sarai will change. Nothing promising the treatment will improve. No assurance that anybody in that camp will apologize, or that Abram will do better next time. And if you know how the rest of it goes, you know he does not. Years from now, there is a second expulsion, and that one is permanent. So let me say it flat. A woman had the most personal encounter with God recorded in the first 16 chapters of the Bible, and the instruction attached to it was to walk back to the house she had run from. That is supposed to land uncomfortably. Look at what does get added. Though, because it is not nothing, she is given a son by name before he is born. Ishmael, God hears. Every time she says that boy's name for the rest of her life, she is saying out loud what happened at that spring. Every time somebody in the camp calls him in from the animals, they are saying it too, without knowing they are saying it. The whole household ends up repeating her private moment, daily, for years. and she is given a future that does not depend on Sarai's mood. Offspring beyond counting, a description of the boy that is blunt and unsentimental, a wild donkey of a man, dwelling over against his kinsman. Nobody is selling her a soft life. She is handed a real one, with a shape to it, and a place in a story that had no room for her that morning. Then she walks. Same road, other direction, same dust, same heat coming off the same ground. Her own footprints are still in the sand where it held them, pointing the way she came, and she puts her feet down beside them, going back. The camp is exactly where she left it. Sarai is exactly who she was at sunrise. The arrangement has not changed 1 degree. Every fact about her circumstances is identical. The only thing different is that she knows she was seen, and she knows the name she gave. And she is carrying a boy whose name is a sentence about being heard. Being unseen by people and being unseen by God turned out to be 2 different conditions, and she was only ever in one of them. That is the first of the 7, and it gets flattened constantly. So let me keep it narrow. It does not mean the loneliness was a misunderstanding. It does not mean she should have felt better on the walk home. She went back to a hard house and lived in it for 13 more years. What it means is smaller and sturdier than the version you usually hear. There were 2 questions in her life that day. Does anyone in that camp see me? Does anyone at all see me? She had assumed the answer to both was no. She was right about one of them. Genesis closes the chapter with bookkeeping. Abram was 86 years old when Ishmael was born. Then it drops her for 13 years. Hagar's story leaves off beside a spring with water coming out of the ground. The next one starts in a hole with none. Genesis almost never tells you what a place looks like. It moves a man 400 miles in half a verse. It covers 20 years with the word afterward. The writer skips things a modern storyteller would spend a page on. Then, in chapter 37, he stops and describes the inside of a hole. They took him and threw him into a pit. The pit was empty. There was no water in it. He says it twice. Empty, and then no water. When this writer leans on something, put your hand on it and feel how heavy it is. A cistern in that country was cut down into limestone and plastered smooth, narrow at the mouth and wider below, shaped that way so the water would not evaporate. A grown man standing at the bottom of a dry one is looking up at a circle of sky he cannot reach. The walls go past his hands in every direction, and they give him nothing. If there had been water in it, he would have drowned, because it was empty. He lived. The whole mechanism of this part of his life sits in one sentence, and Genesis puts it down without comment and moves on. He was 17. Now the brothers. You know the outline. The coat. The dreams. The favoritism their father never bothered to hide. Jacob had 4 wives and a clear preference among them, and the boy standing in front of him was the firstborn of the one he actually loved. Every man in that family could do the arithmetic. Joseph did not help himself. He brought a bad report about his brothers. He told them a dream where their sheaves bowed to his. And when that landed badly, he told them a second one. And in that one, the sun and moon bowed too, which meant his parents. Even Jacob told him to knock it off. None of that justifies what happens at Dothan. They see him coming from a long way off, and the detail is in there because of the coat. A shepherd in that terrain can identify a man by silhouette at a distance. And this one was walking toward them, wearing the reason they hated him. Here comes the dreamer. The plan was to kill him. Reuben talked them down to the pit, meaning to come back for him later, which is the kind of half-courage that gets a man written into Scripture as the one who tried. They strip the coat off him first. That is the order in the text. The coat comes off. Then he goes in. And then Genesis puts down the sentence that has troubled readers for 3,000 years. Then they sat down to eat. Right there, beside it, they stripped their brother, dropped him into a cistern, and somebody unpacked the food. And they ate a meal on the ground next to a hole with a 17-year-old in it. You can hear a voice come out of a cistern. The shape of the stone sends it up. Whatever he was saying down there, they heard it while they were eating. And they kept eating. 22 years later, standing in front of an Egyptian official with things going badly for them, one of them says it out loud. We saw the distress of his soul when he pleaded with us, and we would not listen. They remembered the sound. A caravan comes over the ridge, Ishmaelites out of Gilead, carrying spice and balm and myrrh down to Egypt. Ordinary traffic on an ordinary road. Judah runs the numbers. Killing him gets us nothing. Selling him gets us 20 pieces of silver. And he is our brother after all. Which is a sentence a man says when he wants credit for the version of a crime that pays. 20 pieces of silver is consistent with what a young male slave went for in that world. It is not an insult, and it is not a windfall. It is a market price, agreed on at the side of a road. For a boy, his brothers had eaten lunch beside. Then they kill a goat, dip the coat in the blood, and send it to their father with a question attached. That is the coldest part of the whole affair. They do not lie to Jacob's face. They hand him the evidence and let him say it himself. Now Egypt, and I am going to move fast, because the weight of this is not here. Potiphar buys him, captain of Pharaoh's guard. Joseph is good at the work, and he gets put over the house. And Genesis says everything Potiphar had prospered under his hand until the man stopped paying attention to anything but the food on his own table. Then Potiphar's wife. The text is spare about it, and so am I. She made a demand, day after day. In the words of the text, he refused. Day after day. One afternoon, she got hold of his garment, and he left it in her hand and went out of the house. And she used it. Look at what he loses both times. The coat. At 17, at ripped off him by his brothers and carried away as proof of a lie. The garment, years later, left in a woman's hand and carried away as proof of a lie. Twice in his life somebody took his clothing and used it to tell a story about him that was not true. Both times it went straight to the man with authority over him. And both times that man believed it without asking a single question. So he goes into custody, a fortified house where the king's prisoners were kept. Psalm 105. Looking back at all this, says they put his feet in fetters, and his neck was put in a collar of iron. He was 17 at Dothan. The next time Genesis lets you look at his face and hear him speak, he is 30. There is a way of counting time in a room with one window, and everybody who has been kept in one has worked it out. The light comes through a gap somewhere high up. In the morning, it lands on the wall. By midday it has dropped to the floor. Through the afternoon it crawls across the stone. And there is a particular crack it reaches when the day is nearly done. And a man ends up knowing that crack better than he knows his own hands. That is the clock. That is every day. Then, one day, two new men, Pharaoh's cupbearer and Pharaoh's baker, both senior, both in that prison because they offended the king. Neither of them knows yet what the sentence is. And that is the worst part. And they both know that too. The cupbearer was not a waiter. He tasted what the king drank, which made him one of the few men alive permitted to stand that close to Pharaoh. Every day, alone. In that world, it was an office of enormous trust. Joseph is assigned to attend them. The Hebrew slave who has been in this building for years is handed two important Egyptians and told to look after them. One morning, he comes in, and both of them look wrong. Genesis puts it in one line. He saw them, and behold, they were troubled. And here you learn something about the man Joseph has become. And Genesis gives it to you without a word of commentary. He asks, "Why are your faces downcast today?" Think about what he had every right to be doing that morning instead. He had a case, two of them, sold by his own family, lied about by an employer's wife, and neither charge was ever heard by anybody. He is standing in a cell being kind to two men who will walk out of here inside a week. He asks about their faces. They tell him they have had dreams, and there is nobody to interpret them. If you want to feel the irony of that, remember what put him at the bottom of a cistern in the first place. Dreams, his own, told out loud to the wrong audience. He interprets them. 3 branches, 3 days, and you will be restored to your office and put the cup in Pharaoh's hand exactly as you used to. Good news, delivered straight. Then the baker, encouraged by what he just heard, describes his own. 3 baskets of bread on his head, and birds eating out of the top one. And Joseph tells him the truth. 3 days, and Pharaoh will lift up your head from you, and the birds will eat your flesh. He does not soften it. He does not find a kind way around it. A man asked what it meant, and he said what it meant. Standing 3 feet away, in a small room the 3 of them share. Then Joseph asks for one thing. Hear this as a request from a human being, because that is what it is. Only remember me when it is well with you. And please do me the kindness to mention me to Pharaoh, and get me out of this house. For I was indeed stolen out of the land of the Hebrews. And here also I have done nothing that they should put me into the pit. He does not ask for revenge on his brothers. He does not ask for the woman to be exposed. No damages. No apology. No hearing. Not even word sent to his father that he is alive. Though God knows he must have wanted that one. He asks a man who is leaving to remember him. That is the smallest thing available to ask for. It costs the cupbearer nothing. 1 sentence, dropped into a conversation at the right moment, to a king who liked him enough to give his job back. And listen to the word Joseph reaches for at the end of it. Here also I have done nothing that they should put me into the pit. The pit, same word as the cistern at Dothan. 13 years later, in another country, describing a completely different place. That is still the word that comes out of him. 3 days go by. Pharaoh has a birthday and throws a feast for all his servants. And in the middle of it, he lifts up the head of the cupbearer and the head of the baker among his servants. Genesis uses the identical phrase for both men, and it means one thing for the first and the other thing for the second. The cupbearer is restored. He puts the cup in Pharaoh's hand. The baker is hanged. Joseph got both of them right. Every detail. On the day he said it would happen. There are now 2 Egyptians who can testify that the Hebrew in the prison saw it coming. And one of them is dead, and the other one is standing next to the throne. And Genesis closes the chapter with a sentence that uses 2 verbs where one would have done the job. Yet the chief cupbearer did not remember Joseph, but forgot him. 8 words, and the writer is doing something deliberate with them. He did not remember. That is the first verb, and it is the exact word Joseph used when he asked, "Remember me." The writer picks the man's own request up off the floor and hands it back to you broken. But forgot him. That is the second verb, and it is not necessary. The sentence works without it. Any editor would cut it. It stays because the first verb describes an absence, and the second one describes an act. Not remembering is a thing that failed to happen. Forgetting is a thing that happened. The man did not simply neglect a small favor. Somewhere between the prison and the palace, a person went out of his mind entirely, and Genesis wanted both of those on the record. The door opened. One man walked out, and Genesis spends 1 sentence on what he did with his promise. Chapter 41 of Genesis opens with 4 words, and they are the loudest 4 words in the account. After 2 whole years, not after a while, not some time later, the writer stops and puts a number on it, and then he adds the word whole, which is a word you only use when you want somebody to feel the length of something. 730 days. Give or take. More than 100 Sabbaths. 2 floods of the Nile. Up and back down again. The entire agricultural cycle of that country turning over twice, while a man watched a piece of light cross a stone floor. The cupbearer walked out and went back to work. He stood next to Pharaoh every day for 2 years, holding the cup close enough to speak. And he never said the name, not because he was cruel. Genesis gives no indication that he was cruel. He was busy. He was relieved. He had come within 3 days of being hanged. And when a man gets his life handed back to him, he does not spend much time revisiting the room where he nearly lost it. The prison became a thing that had happened to him. Somewhere inside that thing, there was a young Hebrew who had been kind to him, and the young Hebrew went in the same box as the rest of it, and the box got closed. That is usually how it goes. People rarely forget you on purpose. They forget you because their own life got loud. Now, the 2 years, Genesis tells us nothing about them. Not 1 line. The text goes from the cupbearer forgetting him straight to Pharaoh dreaming. And the 2 years sit in between, like a room nobody opened. We are not told that Joseph prayed. We are not told that he stopped. There is no verse about him holding on to his faith. None about him losing it. No scene where he reminds himself of the dreams he had as a boy. No moment of resolve. No crisis. No comfort. The writer who took the trouble to tell you a cistern had no water in it will not tell you 1 single thing about 730 days. Scripture tells us how the waiting ended. It never tells us what any Tuesday inside it felt like. And I want to leave that gap exactly where it is. Because there is a version of Joseph that gets preached constantly. And in that version, he is serene in the prison, radiant, trusting the plan, making the most of the season. Every bit of that is imported. What is on the page is a man who asked in plain words to be gotten out of that house, and then was not gotten out of it for 2 more years. He was 30 when they came for him. He was 17 at Dothan. 13 years. And the last 2 of them ran after he had already done everything right and asked for the smallest possible favor in return. Then Pharaoh dreams 7 fat cows coming up out of the river, and 7 thin ones coming up after them and eating them. And the thin ones stay thin. Then 7 good ears of grain on one stalk, and 7 blighted ones swallowing them. He wakes up and his spirit is troubled, which is the same word Genesis used for the faces of the 2 prisoners. He sends for every magician and wise man in Egypt. And Egypt had a serious professional class for exactly this. Dream interpretation was an established discipline there, with manuals and trained practitioners. None of them can do it. And that is the moment the cupbearer's memory comes back. I remember my offenses today. Watch what he says next. Because there is something small and human in it. He tells the story. And he tells it accurately. And he never once uses the man's name. There was a young Hebrew there, a servant of the captain of the guard. He interpreted for us. It came out exactly as he said. 2 years standing beside the throne. And the name never surfaced. It surfaces now, at the one moment when it is professionally useful, in front of a king who is upset and needs a solution. I am not going to make him a villain for that. He is not a villain. He is an ordinary man with a good job and a bad memory for people who cannot do anything for him, which describes most of us on most days. They bring Joseph up out of the dungeon. He shaves and changes his clothes, because you do not stand in front of Pharaoh looking like a prisoner. And the detail is in the text, because an Egyptian audience would have expected it. And in the space of a single conversation, everything changes. Here is where I have to be careful, and I want to tell you why. The way this part usually gets told. The 2 years are a setup for the palace. Wait long enough, and the door opens. Stay faithful in the pit, and the promotion comes. Prison to palace. 13 years, and then the ring on the finger. And the whole thing lands on the listener as a promise that the same ark is available to them. The text does not support that. And it is not a kind thing to say to somebody who has been forgotten for a long time. Because plenty of people are forgotten, and no Pharaoh ever dreams. The cupbearer stays quiet. The 2 years become 4. And then 11. And there is no palace at the end of it. And a person who was told to expect one ends up believing something went wrong with their faith. Joseph got a throne room. That is what happened to Joseph. Genesis is reporting an event, not issuing a guarantee. What the 2 years actually establish is narrower, and it holds up better. Another person's failure to remember you does not settle the question of whether your story is over. It only proves they forgot. That is all it proves. The cupbearer's memory was never the mechanism. It felt like the mechanism from inside that cell, because it was the only visible thread running from that room to the outside world. And the thread was real, and the thread failed. And the story kept going anyway, through a channel Joseph could not have seen and would not have chosen. He was 30 years old when they came for him. Nobody sent word during the 2 years. Nobody wrote. Nobody visited. That is not a detail Genesis explains. It is a detail Genesis includes. A man is 58. He goes to the same church he has gone to for 19 years. 4th row, left side, aisle seat. Because he is tall and his knees do better on the aisle. People know his name there. Real people who mean it. The woman who runs the coffee table asks about his back, and she is not making conversation. She actually wants to know, and he tells her. There is a moment near the end of the service when everybody turns and greets the people around them. He turns too. He is good at it. 40 seconds, maybe, of handshakes and how are you and good to see you. And none of it is fake. That is the thing. It is 40 real seconds. Then the service ends and he walks out to the parking lot. He gets in the car. He does not start it right away. There is a stretch of about 2 minutes there that he has never found a name for. He is not crying. Nothing is happening. He sits with his hands on his legs and the keys in the cup holder and waits for the row in front of him to clear. His wife died 4 years ago in March. People were extraordinary for about 3 months. Food showed up. The phone rang constantly. Somebody from the church mowed his lawn twice without asking. Then it thinned, the way it does. Because those people have jobs and kids and their own mothers getting older. And life closed back over the space. That is the correct thing for life to do. And he has never once held it against anybody. He gets invited to things. He would want that on the record. Thanksgiving at his daughter's, 3 hours north. A men's breakfast on the first Saturday of the month. And he goes, and he likes it. What he does not have is somebody to tell about the small thing. That is the whole of it. If you made him put it into words, which he never has. There is nobody to tell that the hardware store moved the light bulbs to a different aisle. Nobody who wants to hear that the neighbor's kid made varsity. Those things used to have somewhere to go. He would say them out loud in a kitchen at 6 in the evening, and somebody would say something back. And it did not matter. And it turns out the not mattering was the point. Now they just occur to him, and then they stop occurring to him. The row ahead of him clears. Somebody taps the roof of his car on the way past and waves. And he waves back and smiles. And he means that too. He waits until the lane is empty before he backs out. You should know what kind of day he just had. 3.5 years of drought. No rain. No death. The stream beds dry. The livestock gone or going. A famine bad enough that the king of Israel and his household administrator split the country between them and went out personally looking for grass. And Elijah calls the whole nation up a mountain to settle it. 450 prophets of Baal on one side, 1 man on the other, 2 bulls, 2 altars. No fire lit by human hands. And whichever God answers is the God. They go first. And they go all morning. They call on the name of Baal from morning until noon. They limp around the altar they built. They cut themselves with swords and lances until the blood ran out on them, which is in the text, and which tells you these were not cynics going through motions. Those men believed. And Elijah stands there and mocks them. Cry aloud, for he is a god. Either he is musing, or he is relieving himself, or he is on a journey, or perhaps he is asleep and must be awakened. That is what the Hebrew says. He is standing in front of the entire nation of Israel, making jokes at the expense of 450 armed men. Then evening comes, and he builds his altar with 12 stones and digs a trench around it. He has them pour water over the whole thing 3 times until the trench itself is full. In the 4th year of a drought, which is its own kind of statement, he prays about 60 words. The fire falls. It takes the offering, the wood, the stones, the dust, and licks up the water in the trench. The people go down on their faces. The Lord, He is God. The Lord, He is God. And then rain, a cloud the size of a man's hand off the sea, and then the sky black with it, and a downpour on a country that had forgotten what that sounded like. Here is the detail almost nobody mentions. The hand of the Lord was on Elijah, and he tucked his cloak into his belt and ran ahead of Ahab's chariot all the way to Jezreel. He ran, on foot, ahead of a horse-drawn chariot, somewhere between 17 and 25 miles, depending on how you trace the road, downhill off Carmel and across the valley in the rain, at the end of a day that had already held a public confrontation, a slaughter, and the breaking of a 3-year drought. That is the condition he is in when he arrives at Jezreel. Legs gone, nothing left in the tank, running on whatever was underneath the biggest day of his life. Then the message comes. Jezebel sends a runner. 1 sentence. So may the gods do to me, and more also, if I do not make your life as the life of one of them by this time tomorrow. That is the entire opposition. A threat, delivered second-hand, by a messenger, from a queen who did not come herself. And the man who stood alone in front of 450 prophets that morning gets up and runs. He goes south, all the way south, out of Israel entirely, through Judah, down to Beersheba, which is about 95 miles and the last town before the desert starts. He leaves his servant there. Then he goes another day's journey into the wilderness alone. There is a scrub bush that grows in that country. The Hebrew word is rotem, usually translated broom tree, and it is not a tree in any sense that would be useful. It is a woody desert shrub, thin and spiny, and the shade it throws is broken and pale, and covers about as much of a grown man as a beach umbrella with holes in it. That is the only shelter for miles, and it is what he sits down under, and he asks God to let him die. It is enough. Now, O Lord, take away my life, for I am no better than my fathers. I am going to leave that sentence exactly where the text leaves it. 1 Kings does not linger over it and does not explain it. It reports what the man said, and then it reports what he did next. He lay down and slept. That is the next verb in the chapter. He said the hardest sentence of his life. And then the exhaustion took him, and he slept under a bush in the desert, with his back on ground that had been in the sun all day. Public triumph on one day. A man asking to die on the next. 1 Kings puts them in the same chapter and does not treat it as a contradiction. Watch the order of operations here, because I would put it in front of every person who has ever tried to help somebody who was falling apart. Nothing happens first except food. An angel touch him, not a vision, not a voice out of the sky, a hand on a sleeping man's shoulder, which is a strangely gentle way to wake somebody. And 4 words, arise and eat. And when he looks, there is a cake baked on hot stones and a jar of water by his head. Bread baked on the stones. Somebody set it there next to him while he was asleep. and it was warm, and it is the kind of bread you make out in the country with no oven, the plainest food there is. He eats, he drinks, and then he lies back down and goes to sleep again. Nobody stops him. He has just been fed by an angel of God in the middle of the wilderness, and his response is to roll over and go back to sleep. And heaven does not object. No lecture. No, now that you have your strength back, let us talk about your attitude. He sleeps. Then it happens a second time. The angel comes back, touches him again, and says it again. Arise and eat, for the journey is too great for you. That line is doing something. It is not a rebuke. It is an assessment. Somebody looked at the man's condition and the distance in front of him and concluded he did not have it in him yet, said so out loud, and handed him more bread. Sleep, food, sleep again, food again. Then, and only then, a conversation. 40 days and 40 nights he travels on the strength of that food, down to Horeb, the mountain of God, which is Sinai, which is where Moses stood. He goes into a cave and spends the night there, and the word of the Lord comes to him with a question. What are you doing here, Eliach? Here is his answer, and it is the sentence this whole chapter is built on. I have been very jealous for the Lord, the God of hosts, for the people of Israel have forsaken your covenant, thrown down your altars, and killed your prophets with the sword, and I, even I only, am left, and they seek my life, to take it away. I, even I only, am left. The Hebrew is emphatic in a way English struggles with. He piles the word for himself on top of itself. It comes out closer to I, me. I alone am the one remaining. And he is not lying. That matters. He is not exaggerating for sympathy, and he is not fishing from where that man is sitting, having watched a nation cheer on Carmel, and then having taken a death threat from the palace within 24 hours, having run 200 miles to a cave. The report is accurate to his experience. He is giving honest testimony from inside total depletion. But the number is wrong. Loneliness does not only change how empty a room feels, it changes how large the world looks. That is as far as the text goes, and that is as far as I will take it. It is enough to notice that a man who could count 450 prophets on a mountaintop that morning could not count past one a few days later. So God answers him, and the answer is strange. Go out and stand on the mount before the Lord. A great and strong wind tears the mountains and breaks the rocks in pieces. The Lord was not in the wind. An earthquake. The Lord was not in the earthquake. A fire. The Lord was not in the fire. Then, a sound. The Hebrew is famously difficult. A still small voice. In the old translation, a thin whisper of quiet. Closer to the literal, something so soft that its main quality is the absence of noise. And Elijah wraps his face in his cloak and goes to the mouth of the cave. Now here is the part almost nobody notices. God asks him the exact same question again. What are you doing here, Eliach? Word for word, the identical sentence, and Elijah gives the identical answer, word for word, including the part about being the only one left. He repeats himself. He has been fed twice, walked 40 days, seen wind and earthquake and fire, and heard the voice of God in a whisper. And when he opens his mouth, he says precisely what he said before, with nothing changed, and he is not corrected for it. He is not told his answer is unacceptable, or that he should have grown by now, or that he was supposed to have arrived somewhere. The text lets the man say the same thing twice and moves on. Then the answer comes, and it has two parts. The first part is work. Go, anoint Hazael king over Syria. Anoint Jehu king over Israel. Anoint Elisha to be prophet in your place. 3 assignments. Concrete, with names attached, which is a strange kind of medicine for a man who wanted to die. And it is what he gets. The second part is a number. Yet I will leave 7,000 in Israel, all the knees that have not bowed to Baal. 7,000. He was off by 7,000. They were out there the whole time. They were out there on Carmel and in Jezreel. And while he was running to Beersheba, and while he was sitting under that bush, not one of them knew where he was, and he did not know where any of them were. And 1 Kings never says the feeling left him. Go and look. There is no verse where the despair lifts. No line telling us he felt better. No moment where the text says he was restored in spirit. He gets bread. He gets rest. He gets a whisper. He gets a correction. And he gets a job. Then the narrative moves. And the next thing we see is Elijah throwing his cloak over a young man plowing with 12 yoke of oxen. The exhaustion was real. The despair was real. The number was wrong. Those 3 things were all true at the same time. And God corrected exactly one of them. Leave the desert. There is no landscape in this chapter and no scene to picture. Because what comes next is not an event. It is a song. Somebody in Israel wrote it down and handed it to the choir director, which means it was meant to be performed out loud in public by people standing next to each other. Psalm 13, 6 verses. It takes about 40 seconds to read. How long, O Lord, will you forget me forever? How long will you hide your face from me? How long must I take counsel in my soul and have sorrow in my heart all the day? How long shall my enemy be exalted over me? 4 times. Count them, because the repetition is the architecture of the whole thing. 4 question. Stacked. Everyone opening with the same 2 words. Nobody writes like that by accident. It hammers the same nail 4 times because that is what the inside of his head sounded like. And look at what he actually accuses God of. Will you forget me forever? Not help me. Not I am struggling. Forget. He uses the word, and he uses it about God, and he puts it in a song for other people to sing. The second question turns the knife. How long will you hide your face from me? In that world, a face turned toward you meant favor. Attention, presence. To hide the face was deliberate. He is not describing an absence he stumbled into. He is describing a decision he believes somebody made about him. The third one is the loneliest of the 4, and it gets skipped because it sounds tame. How long must I take counsel in my soul? That is a man saying he has nobody to think with. He is running the whole thing through his own head. In circles. Every day. Because there is no second voice in the room to check him. Anyone who has lain awake at 2 in the morning arguing with themselves about the same problem for the 4th night running knows exactly what that line is. And here is what I want to point out about David. which is not a compliment to his faith. It is something better. He does not clean the sentence up before he says it. There is a way of praying that most people learn early, where you sand the edges off first. You take the accusation out. You add the qualifier. You would never actually say to God, "I think you have forgotten me." So you say something adjacent and safer, and then you feel vaguely dishonest, and you are not sure why. David skips that step entirely. The first line out of his mouth is the accusation, in the plainest available words, with no cushion in front of it. Then he asks for something specific. "Consider and answer me. O Lord my God, light up my eyes, lest I sleep the sleep of death. Light up my eyes." It is an idiom for the light coming back on behind somebody's face. You have seen it on a person who has been sick a long time and then turns a corner. That is what he is asking for. And he is asking because he can feel it going out. So he is not standing outside the loneliness explaining it. He is inside it, praying from in there, with the door shut. Now the honest part. Psalm 13 turns. 2 verses from the end it changes direction. "But I have trusted in your steadfast love. My heart shall rejoice in your salvation. I will sing to the Lord, because he has dealt bountifully with me." That is a real turn, and I am not going to pretend it is not there. The man got somewhere. Whether it took 10 minutes or 10 months between verse 4 and verse 5, we have no idea, and the psalm gives no clue. But it resolves. And if you have been in church any length of time, you know how this gets taught. Bring your complaint to God. Watch the psalmist arrive at trust. Go and do likewise. Lament. Then resolution. The complaint is the on-ramp. The resolution is the destination, which is fine, and it is true of most of them. But it leaves a person in a bad position if the turn does not come, because now the model says the prayer is supposed to end somewhere. And if yours has not ended anywhere in 8 months, you start to think the problem is you. So hold on to that. Psalm 13 turns at the end. Somebody put a psalm in the book that does not. Psalm 88. It has a heading, like the others, to the choir master. According to Mahalath Leonoth, a maskil of Heman the Ezrahite. That heading tells you 2 things before a single line of the poem. It has a tune name attached, meaning somebody knew how it went, and it was handed to the man in charge of music at the temple, meaning it was assigned, rehearsed, and sung by a congregation. Here is what they sang. "O Lord, God of my salvation, I cry out day and night before you." That is the opening, and it is the last warm thing in it. He still says my salvation. He still says my God. Whatever else happens in this poem, the man never stops addressing the person he is angry with, which is worth catching early, because everything after this gets dark. For my soul is full of troubles, and my life draws near to Sheol. I am counted among those who go down to the pit. I am a man who has no strength. Then he turns and puts it directly on God, and he does not let up for the rest of the psalm. You have put me in the depths of the pit, in the regions dark and deep. Your wrath lies heavy upon me, and you overwhelm me with all your waves. You have caused my companions to shun me. You have made me a horror to them. I am shut in so that I cannot escape. You You. 6 or 7 times in this poem. The second person is the subject, and the verb is something being done to him. And notice which loneliness he names. You have caused my companions to shun me. He does not say his friends drifted. He does not say people got busy. He says they turn away when they see him coming. And he believes God arranged it. And he says so in a song for public worship. Then verse 18, the last verse, the last thing anybody sings before the music stops. You have caused my beloved and my friend to shun me. My companions have become darkness. Darkness is the final word. There is no turn. Look for it. No, but I have trusted. No, yet I will praise. No, I know that my Redeemer lives. The psalm walks straight to the end of itself and stops in the dark with the door shut. 150 psalms in that book. And this is the only one that does that. Every other lament, however brutal, finds some ledge to stand on before it finishes. Psalm 22, which we will get to, starts with my God, why have you forsaken me? And by the end it is talking about all the ends of the earth, remembering and turning to the Lord. Even the hardest ones climb out. This one does not climb out. And here is the thing that gets me. And it is not the poem. It is the decision. Somebody read that song. Somebody in the community of Israel, whose job it was to assemble the hymn book, sat with that text in front of them, got to verse 18, saw that it ends in darkness with nothing resolved, and had the option of leaving it out. Nobody would have missed it. There were other psalms. There were plenty of laments that resolved properly and would have done the same job and left people feeling better on the way home. And somebody put it in. Not in an appendix. Not with a warning label. Not with a note explaining that this reflects a season and does not represent the settled position of the community. They gave it a tune name and handed it to the choirmaster. And it got sung out loud by a congregation in the house of God on purpose for centuries. I do not know why that psalm is in the book. I know somebody decided it should stay. Think about what that decision does for the person sitting in the third row on a bad year. There is a night in that building when a man who cannot pray anything hopeful opens his mouth and finds that the words in front of him are the words he actually has, not the ones he is supposed to have, the ones he has, and the whole room is singing them with him, including people whose lives are fine, because it is on the schedule. That is a community deciding in advance that there will be a song available for the person who has nothing, one thing. So this does not tip the other way. None of it means the man was right. Psalm 88 is an accurate record of what somebody felt. It is not a doctrinal statement about the character of God. He says God has cast him off, and God has not. He says the darkness is his only companion, and the poem itself proves otherwise. Because he is still talking to somebody. In verse 18, a man who was genuinely alone would have stopped praying by verse 3. This one is still going at the end, still using the second person, still aiming it at a listener he has not stopped believing is there. There is a difference between an honest prayer and a settled conclusion, and Scripture has room for both. It kept the prayer that never got to the conclusion. A woman is 62. She does her shopping at 10 in the morning on a Tuesday because the store is empty then. She worked that out over about a year without ever deciding it. The lot is half full. Nobody is behind her in the aisle. She can stand in front of the yogurt as long as she wants. She knows the cashier's name. It is on his tag. But she knew it before the tag, because he has been there 4 years, and he told her once. He knows hers. He says it when she comes through, and he asks how she is doing. And she asks about his classes. It runs about 40 seconds. She knows it runs about 40 seconds. That is the part she would not say out loud to anybody. That she has a sense of how long it lasts. The way you know the length of a song you have heard 1,000 times. She has 3 kids. They call. She would want that on the record. Because when people find out you live alone, they get a look on their face and start assuming things about your children. And her children are good to her. Her daughter calls on Sundays, usually while driving somewhere. And there is a stretch in the middle where the call is mostly the sound of a car. Her sons call less, but they call. One of them puts his boys on the phone, and they say, "Hi, Grandma," in the voice kids use when an adult has handed them a phone. She is not neglected. That word would be wrong, and it would embarrass her. There is a woman from her old book club who has invited her to dinner 4 times. She said yes the first time, and then something came up, which was true. The second time she was tired, in a way she could not explain to somebody who had not been tired like that. The third and fourth times she said she would check her calendar, which is a sentence she has now used twice with the same person. And she is aware of it. And the awareness makes the 5th one harder instead of easier. The woman invited her a 5th time anyway. 2 weeks ago, same email, same warm tone, no mention of the other 4. She has not answered it. It is still sitting there, and she looks at it most days. In the cart, there is a half-gallon of milk. She bought the gallon size for 31 years. She switched about 8 months after the funeral. Not on purpose. Just standing in front of the case one day, doing the arithmetic differently. It goes bad before she finishes it now. She has thrown out enough milk to know. The cashier asks if she found everything. She says she did. She did. This is not the Paul you have in your head. The Paul most people picture is on a road somewhere, or standing in front of a crowd in Athens, or writing a letter that half the Western world would end up quoting. Ships, riots, jailbreaks, with earthquakes attached, a man moving at speed across an empire with a crowd around him. 2 Timothy is not that. It is the last letter we have from him. He is old. He is in Rome. And he is in custody. And this time, it is not the comfortable house arrest at the end of Acts, where he had his own rented place and received visitors for 2 years. This one is different. He calls himself a prisoner. He asks Timothy not to be ashamed of his chains. Somewhere in the middle of the letter, he says he is already being poured out as a drink offering, and the time of his departure has come. Which is a man telling you plainly that he does not expect to walk out of this. And in the last chapter, he takes inventory. Demas, in love with this present world, has deserted me and gone to Thessalonica. Demas shows up twice in earlier letters as one of the people sending greetings, standing right next to Luke both times, part of the inner group. Paul trusted him enough to put his name in a letter to a church. Here he is in the final chapter, gone, with a reason attached that Paul does not soften. Crescens has gone to Galatia, Titus to Dalmatia. Those 2 may have gone on assignment. The text does not say they abandoned him, but the effect inside that room is identical. Whatever the reasons, they are somewhere else. Then the line, "Luke alone is with me." One man, a doctor who had been with him for years, who wrote things down, who was on the ship when it went aground. One man in the room. He planted churches across 3 provinces. He raised a famine relief collection and carried it to Jerusalem himself. There are congregations in Corinth and Philippi and Ephesus and Colossae with people in them who came to faith because of something he said, and there are thousands of them, and none of it changes the count in that cell, which is 1. Then he tells Timothy what happened at the hearing. "At my first defense, no one came to stand by me, but all deserted me." The word he uses for defense is a legal term. This was a formal proceeding, and the practice in that world was that a man on trial brought supporters into the room with him, people whose presence signaled that this was a man with standing and community behind him. There were Christians in Rome. He had written them a letter years before, and at the end of it, he greeted 26 people by name: Priscilla and Aquila, Epaenetus, Mary, who worked hard, Andronicus and Junia, who had been in prison with him, Rufus and his mother, who Paul said had been a mother to him too. 26 names, not one of them in the room. Who notices when a man like that stops writing? The day his case was heard, nobody did. And then he adds 5 words that I think are the most Paul thing in the entire letter. May it not be charged against them. He forgives them in the same breath he reports it. No bitterness, no list, no names. He does not tell Timothy who stayed away, whatever he felt about it. And he clearly felt something, or he would not have mentioned it at all. He closes the door on it in half a sentence. Then, immediately after, "But the Lord stood by me and strengthened me, so that through me the message might be fully proclaimed, and all the Gentiles might hear it. So I was rescued from the lion's mouth." That is the juxtaposition, and it lands 4 verses from the end of everything he ever wrote. No one came to stand by me. The Lord stood by me. Psalm of verb. Twice. About 18 words apart. First as an absence, and then as a presence. Now here is where this usually gets ruined. The lesson gets drawn immediately. People failed him, but God was enough. He did not need them anyway. Jesus was all he required. And if you have Christ, the empty room does not matter. That reading has one problem. Paul is still writing the letter, because in the same document, a few lines away, that same man asks for 3 things. Do your best to come to me soon. Then, more specifically, do your best to come before winter. He is watching the shipping season, travel across the Mediterranean, shut down for months in the winter. And if Timothy misses the window, he is not coming until spring. And Paul may not have until spring. That is a man doing calendar math about how soon he can get his friend into the room. Get Mark and bring him with you, for he is very useful to me, which is its own story. Since Mark is the young man Paul refused to travel with years earlier, over a disagreement sharp enough to split him from Barnabas. Whatever that was, it is over. And at the end of his life, the man wants Mark in the room too. And then the third one. When you come, bring the cloak that I left with Carpus at Troas. Also the books, and above all, the parchments. The cloak. A traveling cloak in that world was a heavy circle of wool with an opening for the head. And it was the thing you slept under on the road. He left it at a man's house in Troas, up on the coast of what is now Turkey, hundreds of miles from Rome. He remembers whose house. He can name him. A Roman prison in autumn is a stone room, and stone in October holds cold the way nothing else does. And an old man in a stone room in October wants his coat. That is in the Bible. 4 verses after the Lord stood by me. The same man asks somebody to bring his coat, and his books, and especially the parchments, because he would like something to read. Nobody in that cell was pretending. God's presence did not make human absence painless. Human absence did not make God's presence unreal. Paul put both sentences in the same letter, 4 verses apart, and asked for his coat. The first thing to say about that night is that he did not go alone. That gets lost. The picture most people carry of Gethsemane is a solitary figure kneeling on a rock with light coming down on him, which is how it got painted. And the painting left out the men. He brought them, all of them, the whole group, out of the upper room and across the Kidron Valley to a place John says they had gone many times before. So it was familiar ground, an olive grove on the lower slope of the Mount of Olives, terraced, walled, planted with trees that were old then. He leaves 8 of them near the entrance. Sit here while I go over there and pray. Then he takes 3 deeper in: Peter, James, John, the same 3 who were on the mountain when his face changed, the same 3 who were in the room when Jairus' daughter got up. And he tells them something nobody in the Gospels has ever heard him say. My soul is very sorrowful, even to death. Mark, whose account is the rawest of the 4, says he began to be greatly distressed and troubled. The Greek behind that first word is startling. It carries the sense of being thrown into shock. Yolde, the way a person looks when something lands on them, they were not prepared for. Whatever is happening in that garden, this is not a serene man submitting quietly. And what he asks them for is the smallest thing in the New Testament. Remain here and watch with me. Not do something, not fix this, not pray for me. Even in the first request, stay here and stay awake. Be conscious in the same garden while this is happening to me. Then he goes a stone's throw away. Luke put that measurement in on purpose. Not out of sight, not around a corner. A stone's throw is maybe 30 yards. Close enough that if any of them had lifted their heads, they would have seen the shape of him on the ground. Close enough that if he had spoken at normal volume, they would have caught most of it. He falls on his face. He prays, My Father, if it be possible, let this cup pass from me. Nevertheless, not as I will, but as you will. Then he comes back, and they are asleep. Simon, are you asleep? Could you not watch 1 hour? Matthew records that. He says it to Peter. Out of the 3, he addresses the one who a few hours earlier had said that even if everyone else fell away, he never would. That man is on the ground with his eyes closed. He goes away a second time and prays the same words. Matthew says so explicitly, saying the same thing again, which is worth catching on its own. The prayer did not improve. He said it, and then he went back and said it again. Unchanged. He returns. They are asleep again. And Mark adds a detail that is almost hard to read. Their eyes were very heavy. and they did not know what to answer him. They woke up and they had nothing. No excuse. No apology. Nothing. 3 grown men standing in the dark, in front of a friend, in the worst hour of his life. And not one of them could think of a single thing to say. 3rd time. Away. Pray. Back. Are you still sleeping and taking your rest? It is enough. The hour has come. 3 times he crossed that ground. The same 30 yards. Out and back. Out and back. Out and back. And every single time he walked toward those men, he was walking toward the possibility that they were awake. And 3 times he arrived and found out. There is a way of telling this that makes the disciples contemptible, and the text does not support it. Luke, of all people, writes that they were sleeping for sorrow. Grief does that. Anyone who has sat in a hospital corridor at 3 in the morning knows the body eventually gives out, no matter what the heart is doing. They were not indifferent. They were finished. It had been a long night. Something enormous was coming. They had no reserves left, and their bodies took the decision away from them, which somehow makes it worse instead of better, because the failure was not malice. It was ordinary human limitation, arriving at the exact moment it could do the most damage. In people who genuinely loved him, he never told them he was fine. That is the thing to carry out of this garden. He had every opportunity. He could have gone off by himself, handled it privately, and come back composed. And none of the 4 Gospels would have been any less true. Instead, he said out loud to his friends that his soul was crushed to the point of death, and he asked them to stay near him. He asked 3 men to stay awake, not to fix anything, not to speak, to stay awake. It is the smallest thing anyone in the Gospels ever asks for, and he did not get it. The arrest takes about 90 seconds. Torches coming up the slope. A kiss, which is the detail that has stayed in the language for 2,000 years. A sword drawn by somebody who had no business drawing one. An ear cut off and put back, and then a sentence in Mark. 5 words in English that closes the door on everything the last 3 years had built. They all left him and fled. All, not most. Mark, who was probably taking this down from Peter, does not spare his source. There is a strange half-verse right after it, in Mark only, about a young man following in nothing but a linen cloth. And when they grabbed him, he came out of the cloth and ran off naked. Nobody knows who that was. Many have guessed it is Mark himself, putting his own worst moment in his own book without signing it. Either way, the detail establishes the speed of the thing. Men ran so hard they came out of their clothes. Then Peter, in the courtyard, he followed at a distance, which is the phrase Luke uses, and it is a good one. He did not run. He got closer than the other 10. And then a servant girl looked at him in firelight and said something. And it took 3 rounds and about an hour for the bravest man in the group to end up swearing he had never met him. Luke adds the line that finishes it. The Lord turned and looked at Peter. Across a courtyard, through a crowd, at the exact moment. By morning, there is nobody left. The trials, the flogging, the road out to the hill. John records that his mother was there, and a few women, and 1 disciple. Everyone else who had eaten with him, traveled with him, watched him raise the dead, is somewhere in that city with the door shut. And then, from the cross, at about 3 in the afternoon, he says it, my God, why have you forsaken me?" There is a common way of explaining that sentence, and it goes like this. At that moment, the Father turned his face away, and the Son was abandoned by God, cut off entirely. And that is what the cry means. Serious Christians have held versions of that. It is not a fringe position, but it is an interpretation. And it makes claims about the inner life of God that go past what the verse itself says. I would rather hand you what is on the page, because what is on the page is stranger and better. He is quoting. That sentence is the first line of Psalm 22, word for word. The opening of a song that people steeped in Israel's psalms would have recognized the second they heard it. And a dying man does not pick a poem at random. Go read what is in that psalm. My strength is dried up like a potsherd, and my tongue sticks to my jaws. A company of evildoers encircles me. They have pierced my hands and feet. I can count all my bones. They divide my garments among them, and for my clothing they cast lots. Roman soldiers were sitting at the foot of that cross, casting lots for his clothes, while he said the first line of the song that describes it. And here is the part that matters for anyone who has ever felt forgotten, which is why we are here at all. Psalm 22 does not end where it starts. By the last third of it, the voice has turned all the way around. He has not despised or abhorred the affliction of the afflicted, and he has not hidden his face from him, but has heard when he cried to him. It ends with all the ends of the earth turning to the Lord, and a people yet unborn being told what he has done. The man quoted the opening line of a song that ends in vindication. That does not settle the theology of the moment, and I am not going to pretend it does. What it settles is smaller and harder to argue with. He said it out loud. He did not think it privately and keep his face composed. He said the word forsaken in his own voice, loud enough that people standing at the bottom of a hill heard it and wrote it down. And it is in the book, and nobody edited it out. The same decision somebody made about Psalm 88 got made again here. The most disturbing sentence in the story was left in the story. Hebrews, written decades later, puts it in one line. We do not have a high priest who is unable to sympathize with our weaknesses, but one who in every respect has been tempted as we are. The word behind sympathize means to suffer alongside, to feel it with. That is a claim about experience, not information. Whatever else Christianity claims, it does not speak to lonely people from outside the experience. The center of the story is a man asking his friends to stay awake, and then quoting a song about being forsaken, out loud, where everyone could hear it. Go all the way back to the 2nd chapter of the Bible. Nothing has gone wrong yet. That is the first thing to get straight. Because almost everybody reads this verse out of a world where everything has. There is no sin in this chapter. No death. No shame. No exile. Nothing broken anywhere on the map. The man has work he likes and food he can reach and no history to regret. And God is standing right there. Not distant. Not silent. Present in the most direct way any human being has ever experienced. Walking in the garden in the cool of the day. Which is how the very next chapter describes the ordinary rhythm of it. That is the setting. Perfect world. perfect fellowship, God on the premises. And in the middle of it, God looks at the man and says this: "It is not good that the man should be alone." 7 times in the creation account, somebody looks at something and calls it good. Light, good. Land and sea, good. Plants, good. Sun and moon, good. Fish and birds, good. Animals, good. All of it together, very good. The first thing in the Bible that gets called not good is a man by himself in the presence of God. Think about what that rules out. It rules out the sentence that has been quietly wrecking people in churches for a long time. The sentence goes something like this: "If God is really enough for me, then I should not feel this. Wanting somebody to eat dinner with is a spiritual problem. The ache is evidence that my faith is thin. And if I prayed better, it would go. And since it has not gone, something must be wrong with me." Genesis 2 closes that argument before it can start. The man in that garden had more of God than any person who has lived since. And the verdict on his aloneness was not good. And the verdict came from God himself. Wanting to be known by another human being is not a gap in your faith. Genesis calls it the first thing that was not good. That is the last of the 7. Here they are, all of them. Before we go back to the kitchen, being unseen by people and being unseen by God were never the same condition. Someone forgetting you does not settle whether your story is over. Loneliness does not only change how empty a room feels, it changes how large the world looks. You are allowed to say the worst version of it out loud. And Scripture kept the prayers of people who did. Not every honest prayer resolves, and the ones that do not were left in the book on purpose. God's presence does not make human absence painless, and human absence does not make God's presence unreal. And wanting people is not a failure of faith. 7 of them, out of 7 lives. A slave woman got her name spoken in a place where nobody was looking for her, and then was sent back to the same hard house. A young man asked one person to remember him, and that person forgot. And the forgetting lasted 2 years. Scripture refuses to describe. A prophet counted the faithful in Israel and was off by 7,000. And what he was handed first was bread and sleep. A king wrote down the sentence, "Will you forget me forever?" And somebody set it to music. Somebody else wrote a song that ends in the dark with nothing resolved. And somebody looked at it and put it in the hymn book anyway. An apostle stood in a Roman courtroom with nobody beside him, forgave them in half a sentence, and then asked his friend to bring his coat. And a man in a garden told 3 of his closest friends that his soul was crushed to the point of death, and asked them to stay awake with him. And they could not manage it. Not one of them was disqualified by what they felt. Not one was told to stop feeling it. Several said the worst version of it out loud, in public, on the record, and the record kept it. Now, let me say plainly what this book does not promise, because pretending otherwise is how people get hurt. It does not promise you a marriage. It does not promise your children will live nearby, or call on Sundays, or understand what your week is like. It does not promise a church where somebody notices when your seat is empty. It does not promise a full table at Thanksgiving, or a friend who knows what to say. It does not promise the ache will lift on any particular schedule, or at all. Anyone who tells you it does is selling you something, and you will find out on some ordinary Tuesday that you paid for it. 3 more pictures. And then the kitchen. There is an email sitting in an inbox. It is the 5th invitation to dinner from the same woman. And the person it was sent to has said no, or said maybe 4 times already. The woman who sent it does not know she is on the 5th. She is not counting. Only one person in that exchange is counting. And it is the one who has not answered. There is a man in a church parking lot with his hands on his legs, waiting for the row in front of him to clear. 4 spaces over. In the next lane, there is another car with a man in it doing exactly the same thing. And he has been doing it for 3 years. And neither of them has any idea about the other. And there is an old man in a stone room in Rome writing a letter with a deadline in it. Come before winter. He does the arithmetic on the shipping season. He knows what happens if the window closes. And he writes it down and hands it to somebody to carry hundreds of miles with no guarantee it arrives, and no guarantee the man on the other end can come. He asks anyway. Now go back to the kitchen. The phone is still face down on the counter. It is later than it was. The 2 plates are still in the sink, and one of them is still from Tuesday, and neither of them is going to wash itself tonight. It does not ring. I am not going to invent a call. That is not how most nights go, and you would not believe me anyway. But something is different about that room, and it is worth naming exactly. The silence in that kitchen has been carrying 2 messages this whole time. The first is that nobody called. The second one, the one that does the real damage, is that this must mean something about your worth as a person. The second message is a lie, and it has been a lie since Genesis 16. Silence is not evidence. An empty room is a fact about a room. Everything you have built on top of that fact, about being unwanted, unnecessary, easy to forget, permanently overlooked. You built yourself, out of the only material available at 8 in the evening, with the phone face down. You may feel forgotten again tomorrow. Nothing in this book asks you to pretend otherwise. But feeling forgotten and being forgotten were never the same condition. And there is a well out in that desert, still carrying the name a runaway slave gave it. She was the one nobody was looking for. She is the one who named him